Good afternoon, and welcome to Unapologetic Educational Research, addressing anti-Blackness, racism, and white supremacy. Thank you for spending time with us today. This series is a collaborative effort sponsored by the Department of Educational Studies and the Qual Lab, both entities within the College of Education and Human Ecology at The Ohio State University. My name is Lori Patton Davis, and I have the pleasure of serving as chair for the Department of Educational Studies and professor of higher education and student affairs. I'm honored to serve as one of the series co-hosts. The purpose of this series is to engage our alums and general audiences in thinking about and reflecting on what it means to conduct educational research from a standpoint that honors Black lives in the research process, while also disrupting racism and white supremacy. Given this critical and turbulent time, we are committed to pushing the landscape of qualitative research and using it to shift our sociopolitical context toward racial equity and justice. Each speaker within the series is a nationally recognized educational researcher and scholar. Perhaps most special is that each speaker is an alum of our college. We hope you find this series beneficial and educational. We encourage you to take notes, reflect, and consider your standpoint and role in the development and implementation of unapologetic educational research. I now will turn things over to my colleague and thought partner, Dr. Penny Pasquay.
Thank you, Lori. Hello, my name is Penny Pasquay, and I'm a professor in educational studies and director of the college's new Qual Lab, which was launched this summer, where we focus on advancing qualitative inquiry toward equity, diversity, and justice, as well as increasing the capacity of qualitative research within our college and beyond. I'm also editor of the Review of Higher Education. So I think Carol put up the outline for you all, and we've certainly already shared that and the housekeeping slide, and Bakari will put the housekeeping info in Q&A for late arrivals. But also, let me take a moment to thank everybody behind the scenes for helping make this event happen. This includes Bakari Lamumba, our qualitative lab grad research assistant, our closed captioning team member from PRI, the Office of Advancement, the Dean's Office, and the Dean. In a minute, the Dean will introduce our guest speaker. After that, Dr. Joy Gaston Gayles will share her research on unapologetically using critical perspectives to inform research and practice. Then we will engage in a dialogue between Dr. Joy Gaston Gayles, Dr. Lori Patton Davis, and me. I'm looking forward to that quite a bit. And after that, we'll have questions from the Q&A that'll be coordinated by Bakari. So please feel free to use this throughout the session. Pop in your questions. We also have your questions that you've shared already, and we'll hope to thread those through. We might not get to it all, but we can certainly try. And finally, we'll take a few minutes to wrap up. And now I have the pleasure of introducing you to the Dean of our College of Education and Human Ecology at The Ohio State University, Dean Don Pope Davis.
Thank you, Penny, and Lori for the introduction, as well as for the opportunity for us to do this. I'm Don Pope Davis, the Dean of the College of Education and Human Ecology. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Joy Gayles to you today. Dr. Gayles is a professor of higher education, as well as a senior advisor and program coordinator for advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Department of Educational Leadership, Policy, and Human Development at the College of Education at North Carolina State University. She previously was an assistant professor in the higher education program at Florida State University. She earned her PhD in educational administration and higher education in our college here at Ohio State. During that time, she was mentored by Dr. Cynthia Dillard, who prepared her to become a future faculty member in the academy through a program specifically designed for students of color. Dr. Gayles says this experience both created community for her EHE doctoral students of color and helped to demystify the academy. As a researcher, Dr. Gayles examines how college impacts students' learning and personal development, especially for student athletes, women and underrepresented people of color in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. She has published her research in top-tier peer-reviewed journals and has written both books and chapters and completed monographs, along with editing several book volumes on these topics. She will be talking with us today about how these themes can demonstrate ways to be unapologetic in our research. I welcome her back to the Ohio State. We are glad that you were able to join us.
Thank you so much, Dean Don Pope Davis, for that wonderful introduction. And I'm so excited to be here, and I'm excited about the amazing things that are happening under your leadership in the College of Education and Human Ecology at The Ohio State University. And part of this greatness I know is happening because of the amazing work of the faculty there, including two of my good friends, Lori Patton Davis and Penny Pasquay. So thank you to the both of you for having the vision to do this work and inviting me to be a part of it. It's always good to come back home, even if virtually. And, these discussions are really important and needed. And, I've attended all of the webinars, even the ones that happened last fall, and I'm here today by default, and I'll attend the other two this spring as well. And so I have a lot of fond memories of my time at The Ohio State University, and I would be remiss if I didn't take a minute to say thank you to the people who poured into me and believed in me much more than I believed in myself at the time, and helped to shape me. And so me, as well as folks like Rich Milner and D.L. Stewart and April Peters and Mark Gooden, all of us were doctoral students at the same time together, and we're still very good friends today. And so I think that is a testament to the love work that scholars like Cynthia Dillard and Bob Ransom and Cynthia Tyson and Tyrone Howard and T.K. Daniels and so many others did, that they didn't have to do, because even back then, this type of mentoring wasn't really rewarded in the academy yet. They made a commitment to invest in us, and for that, I am forever grateful. I also had an opportunity to be shaped by the higher ed faculty there at the time, and so I learned with and from Susan Jones and Marianne Danowitz and Lynn Baird and Ada Dem, and I also have to give a huge shout out to Bob Rogers and the late Bruce Tuckman, who co-chaired my dissertation committee. And I know Tracy Tuckman is out there listening in Cyberland and telling me how proud Bruce is of me right now. And so I appreciate that and all of the amazing experiences that I had when I was there at Ohio State University. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. And I know I didn't do that complete justice, but I had to just reflect a bit. And, you know, Rich and I were joking about, you know, I'm like, why am I so nervous about this? And it's because, you know, it's like you're coming back home and having a conversation with the people who taught you. And so, but I'm fortunate and glad to have that opportunity today. So as I was thinking about this talk and how I wanted to engage in this conversation, I'll be honest, I struggled quite a bit. And the reality is, to be engaged in this work and to live and experience it day in and day out, it's not easy. And so the complexities of using knowledge to, you know, inform theory and good practice, it's real for especially people like me who find themselves on the margins of society because of my identities. And so, we have laws and theories and perspectives that, you know, keep us on the margins instead of humanizing our experiences and creating a more just and equitable society for everybody. So I entitled this talk, Knowing Better to Do Better, Unapologetically Using Critical Perspectives to Inform Research and Practice. So I'm going to start by talking about what it means to know and the problem with what we know. And then we'll move to, what it means to know better and the importance of using critical perspectives and theories and frameworks to help us do just that. And I'll also talk about the dangers that happen when we rely so heavily on knowing that's rooted in dominant ideologies created through hegemonic processes, right? And I'll conclude with how we can know better and then do better in research, policy, and practice. And so I'm going to trouble the waters a bit, if you will. And, you know, we can talk about more pointedly how all of this relates to research and practice during the Q&A. And so I'll tell you right now, I have more questions than I have answers. And so I'm looking forward to the dialogue. And y'all pray that I can do this in 15 minutes. You know, professors are long-winded people. And so, so we're going to do our best. All right, next slide. Next slide. And so, you know, we've all heard the old saying, you know, knowledge is power. And, you know, but this old saying hits different when you think about it in the context of the society in which we live. And in the research world, we talk about knowing and how knowledge is constructed in a lot of ways. We talk about and think about the worldview that we bring to our research in terms of, you know, epistemological and ontological assumptions that we hold that undergird the research process. And, you know, like, what is the nature of reality and what is the relationship between the knower and that which is being studied. And so, you know, there's also the notion of who gets to know and who gets to participate and contribute to the knowledge construction process, and even who feels like they can do so. And when we rely so heavily on certain kinds of research to inform theory and practice, you know, when we primarily use knowledge that is rooted in dominant ideologies to inform what we know and how we know it, and then that's generated through research. And it moves from, you know, a mere discovery process to better understand our experiences in the world around us, to actually, it moves to power. And when you think about knowledge in that way, in terms of who gets to create it and whose experiences are reflected and not reflected, knowledge is indeed power. And so the problem with knowledge and how it's constructed through the research process and used in society is kind of reflected in Antonio Gramsci's work on cultural hegemony, and, you know, which is defined by this notion that dominant ideologies, you know, in society, the beliefs, the explanations, the perceptions, the values, the morals that people hold and use, whether they intend to or not, to inform knowledge that reinforces these dominant ideologies. You know, these forms of knowing reflect that of what's considered the ruling class. And the ruling class in America happens to also reflect all the dominant social identities in society, including white, you know, male, upper class in terms of socioeconomic status, cisgender, able-bodied Christians. That's who the mythical norm is. And in society, you know, we see this dominant ideology everywhere. It's used to justify and inform the social, political, economic status quo. And perhaps most disturbing part of this notion is that, we as a society have unconsciously kind of bought into this dominant ideology, except for those of us who consider ourselves to be woke, right? But how can we not? I mean, we are so inundated with it day in and day out. It's like breathing smog, as Beverly Daniel Tatum puts it, because it's so evasive in our society, in the very air that we breathe. And so, but here's the thing: if we're not careful to disrupt it, it will perpetuate itself and cause harm to everyone around us, including those in the ruling class, who have somewhat of a false sense that they actually benefit from this way of thinking, being, and knowing. And thus, our work as researchers and scholars has to be about doing anti-racist work that constantly disrupts this, and we have to be unapologetic about doing it. And so, that's where this fight the power, EPMD, I'm a hip hop person. And so we got to fight the power. And by power is like, we do that through the research process. Next slide. So, last month, we unfortunately had a case study of sorts that actually helps to make my point. Of course, we talk about what happened at the Capitol, and as much as they want us to stop talking about it, we're just not. We're going to keep talking about it. And, the reality is, though, we all have these ideologies, assumptions, values, perspectives, worldviews that influence how we think and behave. And, this happens at the micro levels and the macro levels of society. So in other words, individuals have values and assumptions and perspectives that influence how they see the world. And in society, we collectively create over time a set of assumptions, perspective, worldviews, and forms of knowledge. And the problem is that much of what we know, or this collective set of values and assumptions that undergird what we know, centers the experiences of white people and other privileged groups in society. And when we use that same incomplete, homogeneous knowledge to inform policy and practice for an entire diverse democracy, like, that's a problem, right? And so, we have this case study of sorts, and, what happened at the Capitol, if you're just looking at it on the surface level, you kind of see it as, people were upset because, 45 lost the election and they decided to storm the Capitol. But it's not until you look at it and interpret it using a historical, socio-political lens do you get a much deeper, richer understanding of, in my words, like, what the heck just happened, right? And so shout out to higher ed scholars like J. Luke Wood and Frank Harris and Lasana Hotep for the webinar that they rolled out soon after this insurrection occurred. And, it provided so much good critical context for analyzing the very extreme ideologies undergirding what really happened that day. And, I appreciate what Lasana shared at the end of his remarks. It's like, we're fighting ideologies, and that requires something different, something innovative. And if you didn't see it, I strongly encourage you to go back and check it out. It's recorded, it's posted. And so it's there for you to watch if you happen to miss it. But adding this kind of context, this kind of critical context, allows us to see what was really underneath the behavior, the ideologies that inform what they did and why they did it in the first place. And so, I have to share this story. So, I'm in a book club for my sorority, and we were reading the book Cast. And so we were reading this before the insurrection happened. And when the insurrection happened and I had gotten halfway through that book, I'm like, no way. It's like, no way that, we are watching like a case study of what she's suggesting in this book unfold. Like, it was happening before my very eyes. And, but the reality is that what she suggests in this book is that we have a caste system in this country. We have a hierarchical structure that intentionally withholds privileges and resources and respect and status. And, it's related to, it's related to, but different from racism. And if you haven't read that book, it's enlightening, disturbing, but also enlightening. One, so much so that I need to pick it up and read it again, because it's so much in there that to unpack, like, I have to read it more than once to digest it. And so you can also look at what happened through CRT, and you see the permanence of racism, you see whiteness as property, all come alive in this text. And so my point here is that when we don't include context critical perspectives, we become short-sighted. And in many ways, as a result, we create solutions that don't really solve problems. And, anything that we create from a short-sighted view that does not include context critical perspective, you can believe that any solution that we create will reflect the same. All right, next slide. We got to move. So I'm also a firm believer that what happens at the macro levels of society has a way of trickling down into all the microcosms of society, including education. So, I wanted to put a theory focused example here. So I'm a higher ed scholar. I teach student development theory. And until recently, with the help of scholars like Lori Patton Davis and D.L. Stewart and Stephen Quay and Chris Wren and Fred Bonner, Elisa Abis, Susan Jones, many others, much of what we know about theory and how college students grow and change and learn, it's rooted in the experiences of homogenous populations of white male students. And, I remember taking student development theory as a grad student, and I had my head tilted to the side most of the time because as we were learning these things, none of it reflected me in my experience. And so we take a theory like social identity theory, which suggests that who we are and how we see ourselves depends on the groups that we're a part of. And so the premise is that, we use groups to inform social identities. And in this process, we form in-groups and out-groups. And through these psychological processes of social categorization and social identification and social comparison, we form social identities and yada, yada. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. But it's not until, you look at, how identities are formed through these critical lenses that you see it's something much different. The book Racial Formation, written by Omni and Wanat, they talk about, this racial formation theory and how, and coupled with the Cass book, it's like, these categorizations are intentional. And they intentionally are designed to exclude certain folks in society. And we assign meaning to social groups that reinforce the social inequities that we see. And folks like Melissa Harris Perry talks about it all the time in terms of how we see patterns of disparities in society that are linked to, these categories that are intentionally designed to create the groups of haves and have-nots. Okay, next slide, we gotta roll. So this last example, really drives my point home if I haven't made it already, is that here's a practical example. So we do standardized testing all over the place, right? Even though we know we have so much data out there that talks about the problems with standardized tests and how they don't really predict future performance, yet we still use them anyway. And again, when you look at what's happening from a critical lens, from a critical standpoint, we know what test scores are about. They're designed to exclude people. And, I love this quote from Michelle Obama, like and it's true of me too, if my future were dependent on my performance on the standardized test scores, I wouldn't be here, and neither would she. And so, next slide, please. And so here, I think you get my point in terms of what can happen in society when we don't apply critical lenses, historical lenses that don't center the people of, or don't center people who have marginalized backgrounds. We end up in a lot of danger. We do things like, dehumanize folks when we do this kind of surface level, or have this surface level understanding that's rooted in the experiences of the mythical norm. And another danger is, when we just look at problems on the surface, we end up assigning problems to people instead of the systems and ideologies that created the problems in the first place. And if we're not careful, we end up sustaining and creating racist policies and practice that continue to marginalize and further disenfranchise people. And so next slide. So I hope that I've kind of troubled the waters a bit here enough to make the case for why critical perspectives are so important and so necessary in research and practice, and in life for that matter. But just in case, I have it here to remind you, we have these critical theories because, they in a way function as tools to help us see what's often dismissed, unseen, and harmful to everybody, not just some of us, but everybody. Critical perspectives also help us kind of deconstruct, dismantle, disrupt, examine, re-examine, interrogate, problems and assumptions that we experience in society every single day. And they also help us think through and better interpret, what we see in our experiences, in life, in our data, in policies, in practice. And, I have my quote up here from Audre Lorde, like, it's going to take something different, and critical perspectives open up a window for us to not use the tools that we already have, because it's clear those tools aren't working. We need something new and innovative and different if we're ever going to get close to solving some of the problems that are rooted in structural inequities and systemic barriers. Next slide. So, in my mind, to know better essentially means to know differently. It means to, know differently so that we can behave differently. And so I'll close with just offering 2 ways of knowing better so we can do better. And I got these ideas from listening to a podcast with Akio Bethea and Brene Brown, and they were talking about, transactional versus transformative, and action bias versus accountability. And I just want to close by, challenging us to really think about what we do and how we do it, so that it's not transactional, it's not surface level, it's not just there to appease people, right? Like if you really want to do something that's transformational, you're going to make some people uncomfortable. And you're going to ask some questions that are going to make people shift in their seats, and that's okay. And then we also have to avoid this constant need. When something happens, the first thing we want to do is respond. And it's not the responding that's the problem. It's when you do so in a way that's not authentic, when you're just doing something to keep everybody quiet and to keep everybody silent and to return everything back to a state of equilibrium. People can see right through that. And we need to be more accountable. We need to be more authentic in our action when we do research, policy, what have you. And then if you skip to the last slide, because I knew I was going to do this, I have so much to say and 15 minutes is rough. So the last slide, I just want to encourage you, like, when you do this work, it's going to be hard, like people going to get upset, and you just have to, do what Maya Angelou said. When you know better, you do better. And that's just it. And you got to find the courage to do so. Otherwise, we end up with Band-Aid solutions to real problems. All right, so I'm gonna stop there. I had some more to say, but I'm gonna stop. And so, all right, so I'm excited about being in dialogue with my friends. Like I said, I don't have a whole lot of answers. I got questions, but not a whole lot of answers. So
yeah, we're gonna click to the next slide and start the dialogue. First, Joy, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm just ready to engage with you about the concrete actions that we can do as in colleges and universities, K-12 settings, organizations, and to put this into action. So I wanted to actually start. I know you, Lori, and I are going to chat now for the next few minutes, and we're asking every presenter the same first question. After your talk, we're so inspired, but what does anti-Blackness, racism, and white supremacy in educational research mean to you? How do you address these complexities that you're talking about with Melissa Harris-Perry and all this work that you've just presented in research? How does it show up for you?
Yeah, well, the first answer to the question is I feel like we got a lot of work to do. And, if you think about it from a critical lens, it's like, the reality is racism is permanent. It's so deeply embedded in everything in this society that it's never going to go away. It's almost like, I heard this analogy and I keep saying it over and over. It's almost like, you bake a cake and you realize, oh, the eggs are bad in the cake, right? It's not like you can just pull the cake apart and pull the bad eggs out. Like, it's deeply embedded. Like, you got to throw the whole cake away and start over with a whole new cake. And I feel like that's what it's going to take. Like, if we could just throw this country away and come up with another one that is more respectful and appreciates the diversity and the beauty of all the people within, like, that will be, how to make America great again. So I just feel like we got a lot of work. We got a lot of work to do. And I don't know that we can do it with what we have. And so it's going to take some groundbreaking, innovative, hard research and changes in practice. And I'm telling you, when you make these kind of changes and when you do this kind of work, they're gonna come after you because, you know, we have a prime example of what happened at the Capitol. And I mean, I'm telling you, what happens at that level, it happens at every level. Whether it's you get a hate email. Sorry, the dog running around. We in COVID, y'all. Tell you, kids everywhere, dog running around. Okay, but you know, but it happens. I mean, they're gonna come after you. You're gonna get some hate email. You're gonna get, but that to me, that means I'm on to something because I feel like I'm gonna spend the rest of my career troubling the waters. I'm gonna get in some good trouble, and I'm gonna do it in research and in practice, and I'm okay with it making people uncomfortable because that means I'm probably on the right path.
So thanks, Joy. I really appreciated everything you shared, and I especially like the analogy of the cake. Um, you're right; it's hard to remove egg. Um, so I was struck, in your presentation around this whole idea of, what we know. And in qualitative research, we talk a lot about epistemology and, knowledge production and what it means in the process. And so what advice would you give for scholars, researchers of color, or any scholar who's engaging in this work, who have a certain, um, it's like who have an embodied experience, right? They know what oppression means. They know what inequity feels like. They live it, walk it every day, right? And in the research process, may be told by reviewer number two, right? That the methods weren't strong enough, or to be told that the issue isn't significant enough, or they haven't made a case. Like, what advice would you give when you're consistently told in research language or in scientific terms that what isn't significant, right? Or what is outdated, or what isn't true. How would you encourage folks to push back or resist that sort of communication about research?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. It's a hard question because at the same time, if you're talking about scholars, right? Like you got 5 years to do this, and you don't have a whole lot of time for reviewer number two, right? And so, but and this was my experience too in a slightly different way. Like I studied college sports and intercollegiate athletics and higher ed. Nobody wants to talk about it, even though it's a real issue, and diversity was all up in there, right? In terms of how we treat student athletes, and it wasn't received well, but I just had to keep pushing. And I get so encouraged because, I don't tweet a lot, but I read a lot of tweets. When I hear, stories of scholars saying after 4 rejections and 5 journal submissions is finally published, right? And you just have to persist, especially if you know that what you are suggesting and what you are saying has meaning and could change and can make a substantial change. You just got to keep going. You cannot, let reviewer number two take you out and make you feel like your work is not valuable.
So what? I'm just one little follow up.
Mhm.
What does it mean when the president of the United States is reviewer number two?
Check.
Right. So I'm thinking back to the memo saying, critical race theory is problematic, and we don't need, any sort of training that apparently makes white people feel guilty, right? We don't need research that makes white people feel guilty. And what I think happened, and I saw in a few cases, I think institutions were really caught in a bind between receiving federal dollars, right, and maintaining the research that many people on their campuses have been doing, have built careers off of, right? So, I wonder, when you say we need something new, we need something, bolder, we need something more innovative. Oftentimes, I think the structures that we're trying to engage all this boldness and innovation is
Right.
there expressly to prevent it, right? So I guess I wonder what becomes the medium, right? Like what becomes the good trouble,
Mhm.
that is worth getting into, right? To push back against this. And of course, those things have been rescinded now. But I
Yeah.
wonder, had this reelection occurred, we still be, I do critical race theory, all of us are engaging
Yep.
in critical scholarship that, is completely misaligned with what was in that memo.
Right. Yeah. So one, I think the memo, when I saw it, I was like, oh, they are scared, and this is like, we are good. This is good, right? Even though, it's a problem to I don't even know, like, you can mandate that, but I understand the connection with the federal dollars, and that's the problem. It's just like, you have to get to places like this, like, you got to persist. And the work that I do at NCFDD, and that work is so powerful because I feel like I'm empowering people to keep pushing back, because it's hard, right? You get tired. You get tired of I had a slide in there about tactics of mass distraction. You get tired of the tactics of mass distraction. And I define that as when you step on the toes, like, they gonna come for you, right? They're gonna come for you, and they do it in very specific ways, and ways that are, you can't, like, they call it, freedom of speech. When we use our freedom of speech, it's a problem, but it's okay for you to do it. So when I say that the laws, the legislation, everything is designed to protect white privilege, and nothing else, right? But we're here, we know better. And so we just got to keep chipping away. And I'm committed for the rest of my career. I'm just going to chip away. I might not get to a solution, but I'm going to keep chipping. I'm just going to just see me with a hammer, and I'm just chipping. And the chipping, I think, will result in some good. I'm probably not going to see it in my lifetime, but I hope, some descendant of mine will see it. But we just got to keep chipping away, and you cannot, succumb to these tactics, especially when you know what they're designed to do. They're designed to stop you from doing work that is needed, that is liberatory in nature, that will, free some people up. And I don't know. And I feel, and I get so frustrated too, because it's like the people, it can't be just the people who are on the margins doing this work, right? The people who are benefiting need to think differently. And that's part of, what it means to know, like, we all have ideologies and values and perspectives, and we need to unpack that. What does that mean? What did you learn growing up about what it means to be X in America, and why is that problematic? And we need to get to that level, because what undergirds people's actions, I mean, that's at the root. People don't want to do that work, right? Because that's a hard, you're dealing with inner child issues, and people don't like that. But if you want to be authentic, if you say you want to be anti-racist, if you say you want to do this work, that's what's required. People always search to, well, what can I do? You can get introspective and work on yourself and figure out what parts of me are problematic and contribute to this larger issue.
Your example so reminds me of the ways white supremacy is just embedded, right? To Lori's point about the federal dollars, and it's being controlled by specific people who are trying to maintain power, as you're talking about, Joy. And one of the examples, so how might you chip away? What are some examples colleges and universities could be doing, right? And you mentioned exams and GRE scores and things like that in your presentation. I also think about Spencer Foundation. And right after the White House had said this about funding, they were like, let's be clear, we're accepting manuscripts that address critical race theory. And in fact, let's advocate for and support scholars who are doing this work. So I think theirs was such a good example of how to chip away, as you're saying. Are there other ways that you're thinking or experiencing it that scholars could take away from this conversation about how to keep doing that chipping in their own work or on their own campuses, tenure and promotion, or whatever those things are for you? Because you're around the whole country talking about this and seeing faculty in many different fields and disciplines.
Yeah. But I think it happens in education in a lot of ways. Like, we chip away at it with the research that we do, right? Research that really does do a good job of taking into context, like, not just looking at things on the surface, but really looking at it from a different lens, from the perspectives of people who, haven't been a part of the knowledge process, like people of color, people who have marginalized identities. Like, how can you take what you know and look at it through their lens, right? And push back. We got to keep pushing back, and that means different things to different people. And so I know how I push back. And I've gotten a reputation now. I'm always going to be the one to say something. Well, I'm okay with that. And that's how I chip away. So I say things in my research, and when I was at Ohio State, like, so when I came to the doctoral program, I was going into administration. I didn't know much about faculty life, and that wasn't even on my radar. But over time, people, like Bruce Tuckman and Bob Rogers and Susan Jones, like, I think you'd be a good faculty member. I'm like, no, I see what y'all do, and I don't think that's gonna work for me. I'm going into administration so I can just do some good. So I find myself, though, even though I ended up being a faculty member, I find myself like, that's where I'm most effective. Like, I got to do something. And so the work that I do with NCFDD, like, I feel like I am fulfilling my purpose, which is to empower people, right? To chip away in their own respective. So you gotta figure out like what lights you up and what you're passionate about, and do it, and figure out a way to incorporate it into the work that you do, the research, teaching, policy, practice, whatever line of work it is, and do it in a way that speaks to something that you care deeply about, in a way, and that's what makes things authentic. And that's where you probably can do the most good. And that looks different for everybody. And even if it's just a matter of, having a group of people where you can check yourself on a regular basis. Like, I have you, Lori, and DL, and Ebony, and y'all check me on a regular basis. And it's okay to be checked, right? Because if you run around unchecked, it's not going to be good, right? It doesn't lead to good outcomes. And I have Bridget Turner Kelly, we check each other all the time. And, it takes a bit of vulnerability to put yourself in that space, but, it's a good space to be in.
Well, I wonder, so going off of what you just said, and earlier in your presentation, you offered the quote, when you know better, you do better. What are some triggers for you around the question, like, how do we know when we know better, right? I think many people, they may attend, this session and learn something and feel like, okay, I know better, I got this, right? Like, what becomes the mental points for you to where you feel comfortable in the knowledge that you have, and feel comfortable acting upon that. And you kind of alluded to this, that even when it's possible to mess up, or perhaps it lands wrong with a particular audience, but what becomes the point for you in this whole knowledge piece of knowing and actually acting on it to, do something better, or to improve something, or to promote equity?
Yeah.
What are the measures for you? How do you, I guess, sit with it and understand for joy, okay, I got this?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it happens in community, right? A lot of times we put ourselves in spaces where we're only talking to people who think like us, right? And you got to put yourself in some other spaces where maybe people don't think like you, and you hear a different perspective than what you have. And then from there, the collaborative nature of those kind of discussions, but a lot of people don't want to be uncomfortable. I won't put myself in spaces where I'm affirmed, and people all think like me and look like me. We just keep repeating ourselves, and that's not knowing better or doing better. That's just repeating what's already here, and we know that what's already here is problematic. And so, I say this all the time. In this new role, I tell people in the college, like, you gotta get comfortable being uncomfortable. And for me, I know I'm onto something because I feel it. Like, when something happens, something goes wrong in whatever setting, I feel it in my body first. And that's my first trigger to say something ain't right. I may not have the language to explain what it is, but then as I go to my people, right? and I explained what happened, and then I developed the language, right? And it was real bad early in my career. I feel like folks like, DL and Rich Milner, they came into the doctoral program and they were ready. They was like, yeah, but I was still in my body, like, I don't know what's going on. Like, something ain't right. I don't feel it, and I don't know quite how to express it. But over time, when you lean into that vulnerability a bit and explore, you begin to understand, okay, this is what's happening, and you read more and you engage more. And that's why what Cynthia Diller and Bob Ransom and folks like that did for us was so important. They put us in these communities where we could talk about what was happening in a way that we could figure out together, what's the best solution or what's the best way to solve this. And it might not be right, but it was right for right then. And then it evolves over time, right? And so that I still use that same kind of way of being and knowing today. Like, if I feel something, when you get over 40, then you really trust what you feel. And so I'm almost on the way to 50, and so it's about to get real in terms of, I just don't even, like, I try to unpack that and figure out what it means. And I do think it's important to have rapport with people, and when you do, you can have hard conversations. But if you don't have any kind of rapport with people, it's hard to have difficult conversations about things that need to be talked about, right? And so I guess that's a roundabout way of answering the question of how I know. I don't dismiss what I feel, and I use that to kind of guide my way to where I'm supposed to be. And then I have people around me who check me, and we check each other, so that we are being authentic and that we're not doing things that are harmful. And sometimes they might be, but we also apologize, and we take responsibility for what we do that may be harmful to somebody else. And then we figure out how we're gonna move forward differently. We just don't dismiss it and act like it didn't happen, and and try to move on, because we can't move on like that. Like, we gotta acknowledge and figure out how we're gonna move together forward differently.
So we've added Bakari. I know you met him earlier, and he's gonna work with us on the questions and the Q&A and that have been going on through this whole time. So Bakari, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Pasquay. Just want to say, first and foremost, glad that you're here. Love your presentation, and I echo the sentiments of all of the participants that I wish it was longer than 15 minutes, but I digress. So with that being said, we're going to dive right in. We have a question from Ashley Turnbull, and she asked, when you talk about epistemologies, ways of knowing and what we know, what are your thoughts on disrupting the lack of Black theorists in higher education programs? In her studies, even at the HBCU level, in grad school, she states we constantly learn about theory from white male theorists.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's true. That's why we got people like Lori Patton Davis, who, just flip the script, right? And then, you can't, like, we talk about them in waves, like first wave theory, second wave, third wave. And it's not that the first wave of theorists was all bad, right? But we also know that it was those were created from a very homogenous group of people that don't reflect society today. And so, we can talk about it, but we can't just say that this is it, right? Because we know that there are other perspectives that do talk about, what does it mean to answer the question of who am I? From the perspective of people who hold marginalized identities. And you got to have that discussion, because we can't answer that question without thinking about all the systemic barriers that exist that limit and try to tell me who I am, or who I can be in society. That's problematic. And so they're out there. They just need to be incorporated into classrooms.
Ooh, let me add one. So Lori, Shayla Davidson, Haynes Davidson wrote with colleagues a piece about Black women intersectional methodologies. It's a new piece that's recently been published.
Oh, I saw that.
At your library. So I just had to do a little shout out. But yes.
Yeah. And so I'm glad, because those theories didn't exist when I was coming through student development theory, which is why all of them went over my head. I'm like, oh, I don't know nothing about this. This does not reflect my experience. I'm waiting for you to hit on something that reflects me, because, you know.
We're still waiting.
Right. I feel like we closer today. Like when I teach theory, I got some other stuff, but it's still lacking, and we need scholars like you, Ashley, to come along and do this work and help us expand upon what we know in ways that do incorporate the experiences of people who have been on the margins in society. I tell my master students, doctor students all the time, like, we need y'all to come on, like, ask them good questions, engage in some work that's exciting, and, you know, participate in conversations so that we can keep expanding what we know.
Very good, very good. So we have another question from Deshaun Dilworth. He states, my question is, how do we bring our communities along with us regarding the critical research we conduct? There's a lot of conversations around community engaged research for both faculty and practitioners, not just to do the research, but also be active practitioners in the work. What do you think this looks like in action?
So bringing communities along with you. So first you got to realize everybody don't want to go, right? And you have to figure out who wants to go and work with those folks, right? Because, you know, I don't spend my time on people who don't want to go. Like, you know, I just, you know, I don't know. But, and together, I think when you have conversations in community with others, like, that's where you can really put your heads together. And I think about even like interdisciplinary stuff, like, you know, we are at higher ed as an interdisciplinary field. And so we always use other perspectives from sociology and psychology to kind of solve higher ed problems. And so, but, you know, I did a presentation at the ASALA conference, and I'm like, these are people I want to do over. Like, I need to go back and major in African-American studies and Black history, because I just had such a good time. And so engaging in other communities that are connected to, you know, tangentially to higher ed, we need to do more of that so that we can learn and engage with other people who come at problems from different perspectives. But, you know, how can we take those lenses and apply them to higher ed problems? So being in community, you know, and just collaboration is good. You know, I don't ever want to do anything by myself anymore, because I learn more when I'm in community with other people, when we're having conversations, we're going back and forth. You know, even if we all, you know, don't agree, but your disagreement can't be rooted in my oppression. That's the line that you cannot cross. And so, you know, I encourage that, and I think you have a better opportunity to do more great work when you're in community with others.
Okay, wonderful. And so this is a question that may be a little outside of your wheelhouse, but this is kind of going back, focusing on a real world application. So one of the questions we received before the webinar was, how do you talk about racism and anti-Blackness to young children?
Oh, I have two, not out of my wheelhouse.
Okay.
And so, and, you know, it's interesting, you know, I have a 15-year-old daughter, and, you know, they have social media, and I'm trying to keep up. It's a struggle, but I try to keep up. But I'm surprised at the conversations that they're having about this. And so they're ready to have conversations. And, you know, but when I was growing up, you know, it was almost like, I don't know if it was because it was painful for, you know, my uncles and aunts and parents to talk about, where they just did it because it was so painful. Or if they were trying to protect us and shield us. But we can't do that today. Not with the way that, you know, Black and brown bodies are being murdered in these streets. Like, I have to have real conversations with my 11-year-old son about all of this, and it hurts. And even though it hurts, we got to have those conversations, because it's a matter of life and death, right? And so what I also think is that young people are ready to have these conversations in a way that, you know, when I was that age, I was trying, you know, I had other stuff. I wasn't, you know, I don't think we had access to social media. Like, whether we want them to see it or not, they're going to see it. If they have a phone or a tablet or any device, I think our job as educators is that, you know, we have to teach them what's real and what's not real, right? Or how information can be used to perpetuate a certain idea. And you have to be able to discern that. And so we've been talking a lot in our college about media literacy and how do we teach young people, because they are our future. And that Amanda Gorman, let me tell you, she told Michelle Obama today, you know, my job, I'm a hurricane and I'm gonna show up regularly, right? I'm just not a lightning storm, I'm a hurricane. And so, you know, these kids are coming and they coming ready and they hurricanes and they gonna give it to us. And we need to prepare them and engage them in conversations so that they can do something different than what we're doing right now. And I think they're ready, even though they're babies and they should be enjoying their childhood. But for some of us, the reality is different.
Absolutely, absolutely. I do the same with my little ones. Okay, so I thought we had time for one more question, but we don't. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Lloyd Patton Davis.
Thanks, Bakari. Well, Dr. Joy, thank you so much for being with us, for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your expertise. For those of you who are joining us and are interested in learning more about her work, there is a slide available where we've posted some of her writings, but you can also Google Scholar her or Google her in general, and she is all over the internet. And so we appreciate you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This was wonderful. I wish we had more time.
And we want to invite everybody to the Qualab Unapologetic series that continues with the faculty who we have coming up who are in Ed Admin and in Counselor Ed, just a fabulous group. In addition, we have the Advanced Methods Institute. Registration is open. We have Sylvia Hurtado and Patty Lather as our keynotes in Qual and Quant, and some critical, thoughtful scholars. And definitely take a look at the website. We invite you to all come to that event. Thank you so much for this. Thank you, the Office of Advancement and everyone. So we look forward to seeing you at the next event. You can find this video up on the Qualab website, and it'll be in a couple weeks. It should be up there with all the resources. Thank you, Dr. Gaston Gayles. We appreciate you.